Lorna.
Thank you, Golo.
And with me is also Maureen Goodman. You are the program director of the Brahma Kumaris in the United Nations, and you are representing Brahma Kumaris at the UN in Vienna. You have been to many UN conferences and have a deep interest in spiritual and ethical dimension of climate change. Since long you have been involved in the interreligious dialogue and have represented the Brahma Kumaris on many occasions. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you very much.
So let us dive straight into the topic. Lorna, can you share a bit your work at Laudato Si? What's Laudato Si and what brings you, and more important, what motivates you to come to these big conferences?
Thanks, Golo. Well, Laudato Si movement, the name, the word Laudato Si means praise be, and it comes from St. Francis of Assisi. 800 years ago, this wonderful saint, who is the patron of ecology, wrote this amazing prayer called the Canticle of Creation and gave us this phrase, Laudato Si. Now, Pope Francis, 10 years ago, just before the COP in Paris, wrote this letter to the whole world about the critical nature of the climate crisis, the ecological crisis. Our movement, 10 years later, is all over the world and seeking to implement those teachings, that wisdom that's in the letter Laudato Si, and bring it to the whole of humanity. Why are we here? Because it's a moral imperative. As Antonio Gutierrez said, faith, or that we all need to show up, and in particular faith communities. And I think what motivates us to be here, apart from the suffering and the pain of the communities and the beauty of God's creation that we want to safeguard, I think it's also because we want to bring a message of hope. As we'll talk about, there are many reasons to give up, many reasons, and yet we cannot give up. And as faiths, there are many, many reasons for us to continue to double our efforts and to hope, and to bring that hope into COP.
That's very lovely, bring hope to COP. I think that's an important topic because for many politicians and negotiators, it's a very difficult situation right now. The news from science is very devastating, I would say.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Maureen, I know you have great love for nature. You're a nature lover. And you have also a deep feeling for justice.
Yes.
You have a very busy schedule, but you still come here more than a week and join us at this conference. What's your personal motivation and to come to COP, and how is this related to your role as a spiritual leader?
Thank you. Also, like Lorna, I think it's very important to show up and to be here, and for faith communities to be present at COP. And when you speak of hope, and I also feel we bring hope, I'm always reminded of the phrase that Christiana Figueres said, which is that we need stubborn optimism. And we really need to continue with that, because this then becomes the motivation for change. Some people say, well, what's the point of COP? And, you know, the governments don't really want to take those decisions. But I feel that if the faith-based organizations, those who are activists, those who really believe that a better world is possible, that we can return to a flourishing world. It's not actually something new, it's something that we're returning to, because it is a natural thing to have a flourishing world. That it's so important we show up, because we create an atmosphere, we give a message, we show examples of projects that are actually working to turn around, to show examples of how clean energy can work. For example, we have a project of sustainable yogic agriculture. So there are things that are happening that really say, yes, solutions are possible. So I feel that faith-based organizations show up with a solution-based attitude. And one thing that I remember from Baku it was just after the US elections and people were in so much despair in the last COP. And then somebody said from the platform, despair is not a strategy. And that's never left me. And when I say that to people, it's like, okay, we have to do something. And I, as a spiritual, I wouldn't call myself a leader, but use that phrase, but as a spiritual person, it is a spiritual crisis. And so we need to help everyone come to that point where spirituality can begin to make a difference.
How lovely.
Yeah.
And interestingly, because you mentioned about the purpose of COP, recently they calculated that the efforts of the UN and the legislation to deal with climate change has already bent the curve, the trend curve, and instead of heading for 3.5, we're heading now for 2.5 degree, which is still above the 1.5 we should stay within. But it means the UN process has its effect in climate change and has already brought noticeable betterment, in the situation. So it's not like that it's only about talking, it's really also about a lot of action.
But I'd also add that before, the COP conference has never gotten the news. Now they are prominent in the news, and that is a big difference.
Yeah, that's right. I'm scanning the news every day. It's nice. The headlines. Lorna, Antonio Guterres criticized heavily the fossil fuel industry, I think in the leadership summit a couple of days ago, and called it a moral failure, which is quite interesting. Why some businesses are so reluctant to come on board and rather obstruct the needed climate action. It's actually not difficult to make the math and see that at the end of the day it becomes much more costlier not to do something, and we destroy our business also. So what's the reason that the industry or some of the industries are so reluctant?
I think it's not a small portion of the industry, but it's a very powerful part of the industrial complex that we have today. And I think that Antonio Guterres was very courageous and spoke truth in terms of naming the fossil fuel industry in his speech. It doesn't happen often, even at COP, that the fossil fuel industry is named and shamed for the inaction. I think we are caught now in a perverse logic, a perverse economic logic, which is driving us towards destruction through our inaction on fossil fuels and continuing to subsidize the fuels, to enable those companies to burn, to invest in future oil production or gas production, coal production, underwriting the continuation of that industry. That has huge implications for the entire system. And the logic that we're in right now is who can drill the last barrel of oil? Because those companies know that the end is coming, but they don't know whether it will come through the end of the oil or the end of the moral license and the political license. So we're in this perverse logic, and I think many things need to change, but I think that what is lacking now is at a political level, the capacity to move together towards change, to manage the transition. Because in the work I do, I meet many business leaders who are doing sincere work, many people who have renewable businesses, who are in the circular economy, who are desperate to scale these, but they're facing a brick wall in terms of the power and the subsidies that lie behind the fossil fuel industry. At Laudato Si movement, with many other faith groups, we are backing the call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Because unless we address that gap in the Paris Agreement, it doesn't mention fossil fuels, and we have a complementary treaty to manage the wind down of fossil fuels in an orderly way, we're going to continue in this perverse logic.
I think in Baku it was for the first time mentioned that we should move away from fossil fuel.
In Dubai.
In Dubai it was mentioned.
It
was the first
Dubai,
time
but
mentioned.
also even in Glasgow also, I remember in the last session between India and China, they were between
So-
phase out and phase
phased
down.
down,
That's
and it was
Yeah.
turned to phase down.
Yeah.
So it's also part of the mindset probably that,
Yes.
that many are stuck in old ways of thinking.
yes.
And reluctant to shift towards the new models of economy because
Despite-
they require us to shift our lifestyles and to be thinking differently and to
despite they all have families and the kids, they are probably going to them and says, what you're doing, daddy, and all the
Yes.
company, it's quite
it's
interesting.
a kind of madness, I
Yeah,
think.
it's a dilemma for sure.
Mhm.
That's clear. Thanks very much, Maureen. Definitely, we have to bring back ethics into the whole process, and it seems ethics and moral are right now not fashionable and are somewhere hidden in the closet. So, how to bring them back on the center stage and make them the imperative for our actions and decision-making process? Because if everybody would follow a moral code of conduct or ethical principles, we wouldn't do what we're doing right now. And how meditation, how bring them back on the center stage, and how meditation can help in that transition process?
Well, it's a crucial step that has to happen. And I was, when I was thinking about this question, there's the ethics which provide the framework for working, but those ethics have to be connected to our values. And our values are those deeply held beliefs that really motivate us from the inside. Because I do think motivation has to come from an inner realization and our values that connect to our conscience. And I think this is the thing, awakening the conscience at this point, that's what enables people to say, this, I'm going to change, as you said, the way in which I live, the way in which I show up in the world. I know many people who've made the decision to live a simpler lifestyle. They've encouraged the people around them to do the same. And actually, when people begin to live a little more simply, and when I say simple, I don't mean that you need to put on sackcloth and ashes or something like that. Live well, but how much do we need? I'm always come back to Gandhiji's saying that there's always enough for everyone's need, but never enough for anyone's greed. And people who are able to live in a less materialistic way actually have greater happiness. And I think that, and even scientific, social science research shows that, the more wealth you have, okay, to a certain extent your happiness increases, but then the curve starts to actually go down because there's just a lot of tension, a lot of fear of losing something. And so I think once people begin to have a different experience of a different way of living, they'll then say, yes, this is now what needs to happen. So I really feel meditation is a deep reflection. It's about touching people's hearts, and then it takes a few to create a wave, and then the wave carries on itself. At first people say, well, you're crazy, and then eventually, well, what's new? Yes, this is what everybody's doing. So I believe it's coming. It has to come.
Very nice. Interestingly, also, this time there's a record number of indigenous people here at the climate conference. I heard about 3,000 to 4,000 people from indigenous communities, and they live in harmony with nature. They don't have this idea, I need more to be happy. They just live day to day what nature provides, and their sort of footprint is quite low, And it's very nice that they are part of the COP in a bigger way, and I think the government, through its initiative of Multi-Rao, to include the wisdom of indigenous communities is going in that direction also. Very nice, great. Lorna, this conference is quite crucial. Everybody says we're very close to some tipping points and so on. So what has to be done in terms of ethical investment? And it's linked also to the question that the West finally should accept its moral responsibility for climate change and come up with the needed funds. I mean, behind the scenes, a lot of talk about money, and I know there is this roadmap from Baku to Belém, and in Baku there was this $300 billion, which is still not flowing. And so what has to be done to bring ethical investment in the foreground? Should it become mandatory? Should it become law? And what has to happen that the West accepts its responsibilities?
I think that's the biggest question that we're facing at this COP is whether the West or the rich countries can actually step up, because it seems actually that there's less and less money available, and it's again comes back to this the way that our economies are structured and the inaction of the governments to prioritise their responsibilities. We're seeing it both on the development aid side of things, we're seeing it on the climate finance. We're talking about this COP as the COP of implementation, and I think that is really, it shouldn't be a COP to be starting to discuss a lot of new initiatives perhaps, but it needs to be one that's really focused on paying up the money that's required. Now today in the Loss and Damage Fund, which was hard fought for in the previous two COPs, finally the mechanism is up and running, and they expect the first disbursements of funds to be made in the next couple of weeks. But the amounts of money that they're talking about right now are paltry. Poultry, they're very small poultry, not like the chickens, a different word, but they're very small compared, like they would not even cover one climate disaster like Hurricane Melissa. Now, you see what happened there, that the government of Jamaica had been very clever, thinking to the future, and had insurance against a natural disaster of that scale, which was unthinkable. The insurance companies offered it perhaps because they thought this was a once in a 1,000-year event, that you would reach those sustained wind levels, and it happened, and they had the money to get back up and running. But to be honest, I think more is needed. I think more is needed, and we're not going to see a change in COP until we shift our way of thinking. And I say that in a kind of, we need to not lose hope in the current process. We need to not allow the inaction or the United States or whatever the geopolitics to get in the way of what can be done. But we also need to ensure that all the action that is already happening is accelerated and is seen. And that's why Laudato Si movement, together with many partners, are going to be launching something called the People's Determined Contributions. We have the national determined contributions, but we know that those contributions, everything is constructed around those. They're not good enough. They're not going far enough, and they're not representing the whole of what is happening. So our idea, which came out of the global ethical stocktake, the one that we had in Castel Gandolfo in the Laudato Si Gardens, multi-faith stocktake, we had this idea, what if we were to launch something which would enable different kinds of communities to make their commitments, like the nationally determined commitments, but like the Brahma Kumaris commitment or the Laudato Si commitment or the faith, bring them together. So we're working on this proposal, and we think that it could be a way to bring this ethical stocktake, this ethical input forward, because that's very important, even perhaps more important this year than some of the other decisions, is how do we ensure that global ethical stocktake wasn't just a nice little, something that happened, but that wisdom becomes something, and we think that the people's determined contributions might be a way we can make that happen.
Thanks very much. And that's another interesting initiative by the presidency of this conference, by the Brazilian government, the Global Ethical Stocktake. And I think Brazil is also following a bit of an unorthodox approach at this conference. Let's have more action and less talk. And they say, let's fulfill the commitments of the past.
Yes.
If we actually fulfill the commitments of the past, where the world community has agreed, we would actually be able to tackle climate change already.
Yeah.
It's the problem is that we're not. We're always late.
Yeah.
Even you can see the NDC, the National Determined Contributions. Everything is lagging. Everybody comes late, and then it's not enough. So time is running slowly, and I'm looking on the clock. Such nice inspirations on finance and ethics, and it's a wide topic, and much more could be said, but let us conclude here, wrap it up, and I would like to ask Maureen to conduct or share a short meditation with us, and bring back ethics on the center stage of our decision-making process.
Okay, can I just add one thing that, the Interfaith Liaison Committee have been looking at faith-determined contributions. So I think it's all connecting.
Yeah, it's all connecting.
It's all connecting. So there you are, a wave.
A wave.
A wave.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like us to just spare a few moments to reflect. And to go inside and consider, what is it that I truly value? What brings meaning to my life? And as I ask those questions, I move away from the external, the chaos of the world at the moment, to think about the inner treasures that I have, the treasures of the spirit, the soul, the treasure of peace, the treasure of love, the treasure of wisdom, and my conscience tells me that these are the qualities that are inherent and natural to the human being, and these are the qualities that need to guide my life. Bringing wisdom into my thoughts, my words, my actions, my decision making. And through wisdom, we can again, together, create or return to a flourishing world. Where every living being is able to flourish, and we live in harmony together.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Maureen, for taking us to the flourishing world. How lovely. Yes, this brings us to the end of our first panel discussion, live from Berlin. So this was the first time we started our series today. Thanks a lot to our speakers, Lorna and Maureen, for sharing your insights, valuable insights on the ethics, the dimension of ethics. And thanks also to our patrons, sponsors, and all the volunteers also behind the camera all around the world, which make this studio actually possible. And please join us tomorrow at the same time for another interesting session of our Climate Wisdom Studio. And for details, please look on our webpage, echo Brahma Kumaris/life. Last not least, thanks very much to all of you, our audience all around the world, and I hope you are inspired. You can also stay tuned in. We will play a short video, and in a couple of minutes we will have part 2 of this conversation on climate, ethics and finance. Goodbye and good night from Berlin.